name is Mackenzie Orr, and my encyclical is titled Deus, Caritas est, written by Pope Benedict XVI. It means God is love. For my thesis statement, I have Deus Caritas est discusses the multidimensional meanings of love and how to apply these definitions in the church ministry of charity. So my encyclical talks about the love that God lavishes with us and how we share it. God's love is fundamental in our lives, but before we start talking about that, we need to understand what the word love is. Pope Benedict XVI says that today's world has depreciated the word love and it has lost its value because we have one word for love, unlike the Greeks who have multiple. We have the same love for love of country, love of friends, love of work, love of family, and most importantly, love of God. To differentiate that loves God, we must look at its most radical form, when he sent his only Son to earth in human form to die and sacrifice his life to save us from sins. This leads me to my next slide of how we encounter God. So Jesus gave himself at the Last Supper in the form of bread and wine in his own self, body, and blood. This is considered man's real food that nourishes us and draws us closer to Jesus and therefore God. So through the Eucharist, we find union with God in Jesus' gift of himself. After discussing God's love for us, we can ask ourselves how we love God. Since we cannot see God, we must love our neighbors. Love of God and neighbor are closely bonded, and it is impossible to do one without the other. Since we cannot see God, we must love all of his creation and therefore our neighbor. Next, we can look at how we love in the church. Since loving God and neighbor are so closely tied, loving neighbor becomes a fundamental service of the church. The church seeks to promote man in his life by attending constantly to man's sufferings and needs. The church evangelizes through word and sacrament. Therefore, the service of word and sacrament are just as important in the church as the service of charity. So what are these services and how do we live them out? These services can be any response to a man's needs in different situations. For example, the corporal works of mercy, like feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, caring for the poor, and visiting the imprisoned. We can awaken the love of God in others by listening to them and kindly informing them of God's love. This is how we can be the best witnesses to God, by being pure and generous. We can spread God's radical love with dedication and kindness. Show others love through our charitable organizations instead of informing them of God's love. We can be like Mary and the saints through this. Finally, Pope Benedict touches on the church and politics. Justice is the aim and central attention of all politics. So, what is justice? You need reason to decide that, and faith and reason are so closely tied together that this interrelates the spheres of church and state. There is no intention of the church having power over the state, like many people say, but Pope Benedict XVI wishes to be a model of conduct that we can use to purify reason and contribute instead of taking over justice. We can just help. We can help form the consciences of the people in the political life. A few controversies after the publication of Deus Caritas est. First, one Catholic theologian was upset that Pope Benedict didn't include the charity that the Catholic Church shows towards couples who use contraception or are divorced and remarried. Many other people also think that the church has no place in politics and that they should be separate, but Pope Benedict still says that the state should acknowledge and support the church. Now we have the contradictions of what the modern world believes and what was in the encyclical. Nietzsche has many followers and was vocalized one of the concerns with the word eros, which he says that the Catholic Church destroyed the word. In his quote, he said that doesn't the church turn to bitterness the most precious thing in life? So Pope Benedict XVI argues, many people believe that the Bible avoids the word eros and destroys it, but Pope Benedict XVI says that eros was actually reduced to the word pure sex, and the body has become a commodity, a mere thing to be bought and sold, or rather man himself becomes a commodity. Pope Benedict XVI was not against the word eros itself, because that simply means the love of God and woman. But since it has been reduced to this terrible definition, and it has destroyed the dignity of man, this is what he rejects. He rejects the new definition of it, not the word itself. The church is actually trying to heal and restore the word eros. He calls for its purification and healing. Relevance today of the encyclical Deus, Caritas Est. It teaches us to differentiate between the love for material objects and the love of God. It instructs us to spread the word of God, the love of God to others in the world through the service of charity in the church, and it applies the teachings of the church to politics. Thank you.